Okay, well, yeah, you know, my name is Malte, and you know, I've gotten around many people who are very interested in ponies because, well, I happen to be very interested in ponies. Well, we are bronies, and the thing is, I usually do this as a profession, talking to people about history. I'm teaching at several community colleges of sorts, so-called Volkshochschulen in Germany. That is, well, education centers for adults where people usually go because they want to go there. And then among the more than 140 presentations I've held there so far are some about mythology, legends, etc. And then I thought it would be a good idea to combine the two, and I actually offered the presentation on unicorns and other fable equines at the Volkshochschule there. And the presentation today is based on that one. However, today I have an audience of experts, I suppose, and therefore there will be some parts in this presentation that would not be part of the same presentation as the Volkshochschule, where people just wouldn't know who or what the heck a Scootaloo is, or what it has to do with a hyperlectrion. And looking at your face, you may not know what a hyperlectrion is either, in spite of being a brony. And that gives me courage to say that even though you are all pony experts here, there are a thing or two that you are going to know after this presentation that you will not have known beforehand. And I think it's almost time to start. But there are a few more people joining us. And first of all, also let me say that I'm very grateful to all of you for being here, considering the competition I have for this here presentation with the voice actor panel going on. So I really appreciate your interest, and if after the presentation you would like to have a little pony origami or handmade paper with My Little Pony watermark in it, or something with My Little Pony symbol printed in here, that's part of the bribe that I offer only after you arrived here, so it isn't really a bribe. Okay, the presentation today, it's about unicorns and other fable equines. Equines being, well, all kind of beings that are inspired or based on horses. And there are quite a few of them. Unicorns will cover about half of this presentation, but you will hear of Pegasus too, of course, and you will hear when the hippogriffs entered the picture, what on earth a hyperlectrion is that I mentioned before. And there will be several more equines from mythology, some of whom are air-based, some are water-based, and even at the beginning of this presentation there will still be a lot more to explore, and I hope to increase your curiosity for that. Yes?
Will we be covering the so-called nightmare horses too?
They will be mentioned. Do you mean the nightmare?
In short, these are actually fire-based horses that can actually, survive galloping through fire, and actually are sometimes brought up in mythologies of hell.
I think you are referring to something especially present in Celtic mythology, at least
yes,
when I was
like horses covered in mist when they run across the ground.
There are quite a few different depictions of them. They are not a main part of this presentation, I must admit, but the English word nightmare, you have the mare in it.
Yeah.
In German it doesn't really work out. That's Albtraum, referring to Alpen, but in any case, it's not a main point here, but there are similar creatures here. But in Ireland, you often see the nightmare paraded through the streets before Halloween, at least that's what I saw in Dublin.
Had one of these, actually.
Okay.
It is said to be one of the most vanishing creatures, and it would not allow any other man to send its back.
Yeah, there are some rather scary horses involved today.
Yeah.
Okay, Anyway, if there are questions in between, be my guest. My presentations are always meant to allow for questions, and then I'm going to run out of time and hurry up a bit, but I'll do my very best to, not to push the patience of the volunteers too much. But let me start with one little passage I read in one of the books I read for the presentation of this presentation, and let's see if you catch on what caught my attention there. I translated it literally from the German translation of the English book back to English, but here we go. The line in this book about unicorns read, "Pretty much exactly 2,400 years later, on September 12, 2001, Professor Dr. Herbert Hagen, who had intensively studied this fable animal called the unicorn, a fable animal which could not be harmed even by the sharpest mind. This was at a presentation at the Paleontological Museum in Munich." Did anyone catch the surprising part about this? Okay, I repeat the date. It was on September 12th, 2001. So while the world was busy worrying and being rightfully shocked about some events of the previous day, there must have been a meeting at the Paleontological Museum in Munich where people were discussing unicorns. So that takes really some devotion, and we are talking of a time there when the Brony fandom hadn't even really picked up yet. I tried to find out more about this event, that remarkable day. I didn't find any more information on it, but in any case, I think it's a good example for the enthusiasm, the devotion, the how they care about the rest of the world that this animal can inspire. And the first part of the presentation now is going to be about the relationship between humans and horses in general, and how horses or equine creatures entered the realm of human mythology too. Then there will be the long part about unicorns and their economical factor, and especially during the Middle Ages. You will come to know about the, well, kind of predecessors of bronies who were kind of extreme about them, to say the least. And then we are going to cover some, but not all, that would take the entire weekend or more, of the mythological horses to be found. And in the end, you will learn why we are the makers, the creators of mythology for later days. So let's start with humans and horses. The relationship between the human and the horse in different contexts is a rather old one. For what you see here is horse sculpture dating from 32,000 years ago. So this is one of the oldest existing pieces of human art we have in the world. There are not many pieces that are older. I think it may actually be the oldest. It is a horse carved from a mammoth tusk and found in the Vogelherdhöhle, that's a cave in the Swabian Jura. Horses were at first mostly prey to humans, and to this day, well, horse meat is used in some dishes, sometimes intentional, sometimes as part of food scandals, lasagna and all that. But it is uncertain when exactly humans started to domesticate horses for the purpose of riding them as a means of transportation for the first time. But the best estimates that paleontologists, or much rather anthropologists, are making dated at around 5,500 years ago, and probably started on the plains of Eurasia. And horses gained a very major importance for human life, and apart from being a status symbol, a symbol of wealth if you owned horses, they also gained religious adoration in human cultures. And I have one example for this, one of many, the Uffington horse. The Uffington horse, or the Uffington white horse in Oxfordshire, it dates from around 1000 BC. It's a hill figure that was created by digging trenches and filling them up with white chalk. And it measures 107 meters in length, 37 meters in height. And I really think we need to do something like this at some future pony convention. I mean, it will be more lasting than the chalk drawing that we have done on occasion. But the point being that the horse became very important, and here are some older pieces. And here we have one that was found in the cave painting found in Lascaux in France. So it dates from around 90,000 years ago. And this drawing and this one in the cave, they have been nicknamed by the paleontologists who found them, by the explorers. They were nicknamed unicorns by the scientists, but there's nothing really to base the assumption on that these are really intentional unicorn depictions, that maybe, especially in the upper case, it may be just cattle, and down here it may be an unintentional, come on, okay, the point doesn't work, but anyway, you get the idea. This may not be intentional, this horn on the pony, but still we can guess it, yeah. The point is that we don't have any oral passing on of stories from that time. However, there is one theory that can neither be proven nor disproven of an animal that may have played a role in inspiring the unicorn. Meet the gracious Elasmotherion. The thing is that this being has been around in the early Ice Age. There has been some considerations that the Elasmotherium may have had some overlapping time frame with humans, and recent discoveries showed that it had been around for a little bit longer than paleontologists had assumed. Still, it's quite unlikely that the Elasmotherium is really a basis for unicorn mythology, or that legends about it had been passed down for millennia by our early ancestors, same as there haven't been any legends or myths about mammoths, which were definitely prey for humans but didn't really enter the realm of mythology. However, the thing is that the Elasmotherion is an exception in having just one horn, for in most cases horns come in symmetrical pairs, which would make the form of a unicorn with just one hair unusual but not unique in nature. And there has been one example, the Indian rhinoceros, called Rhinoceros unicornis. It sports only one horn. Well, it used to, it doesn't exist anymore, but it is different from that of classical horned animals. The bovidae, that is the antelopes, cattle, sheep, goats, etc., they have a horn with a core of bone. That's a usual form of a horn, while the horn of the Rhinoceros unicornis in India was made of pure keratin, you know, the material our fingernails are made from, too, similar to rhino horns nowadays. And also, speaking of horns, antlers of deers, cervidae, they are on the other hand pure bone with some skin on it rather than keratin, so a different material again. And yeah, I'm going to talk about the tusks of narwhals too in this presentation, but they are made basically of tooth. They are teeth rather than horns. So, where do the unicorns enter the picture? The thing is, I'm going to quote the first sources about unicorns that we have too, but first let me mention a mention of unicorn that have probably made them more popular, especially in the Middle Ages, than people realize, and it was probably a translation mistake. For the animal that you see here in this depiction, it is a mosaic made in 1213 in Ravenna, in a church, and it shows an animal believed to be in the Bible. It is an animal that in the original Old Hebrew texts was called the Re'em. Re'em in the Old Testament, and they were interpreted in many translations as unicorns. because the original Hebrew text was translated to Greek. And in Greek, it became the monoceros, or the rhinoceros, which was translated to Latin, where it was turned into unicornus, which was turned into unicorn in English, or Einhorn in German, and whichever other words there are. So the ram from the Bible is probably not a unicorn, but I'm going to read some Bible to you now to have you known what the Bible said about the unicorn. And I'm quoting Job chapter 39, verses 9 to 12, and people start to leave. Sorry. But it will not be too much, but it says, "Will the unicorn be willing to serve thee or abide by thy grip? Canst thou bind the unicorn with his hand in the furrow, or will he harrow the valleys after thee? Wilt thou trust him, because his strength is great, or wilt thou leave thy labor to him? Wilt thou believe him that he will bring home thy seed and gather it into thy barn?" In more recent translations of the Bible, the word unicorn has been replaced by aurochs, or like wild steer, which is probably more to the point what they probably meant. But the point being in this part of the Bible that it was absolutely impossible to tame a unicorn, and that God would ask Job if he would think that he could basically tame a unicorn, which was deemed absolutely impossible. And here are some other depictions, sometimes interpreted as unicorns, but more likely they are a question of perspective rather than being an actual unicorn. This one is from the Indus culture, so we are talking of a region where the Indian rhino may have played a role. However, in this seal stone that was used there, we have something that is probably cattle with one horn being covered by the other. But then there is this animal, and here we have a very likely basis for many of the unicorn legends. For what you see here is an oryx. An oryx that is a very shy antelope-like creature, so to speak. So being rather shy, you often see them from a distance only. And it also may be the ram from the Bible, because we have evidence that the Egyptians tried to tame the oryx, but failed miserably. That animal would not be tamed, and they couldn't really keep it as cattle, though they would have liked to, because oryx lasts very well in harsh climate and is very, very able to survive. But the thing is, even in the Middle Ages, the sight of oryxes may have confirmed the concepts of people that they already had about unicorns. I'm talking of crusaders now, going to the Holy Land and seeing from a distance an oryx which may or may not have lost a horn in an accident, for they don't regrow once a horn is broken. And if you see this in some flickering air, etc., you have your unicorn confirmed. But here. But my main point here is that for the longest time, and I'm talking up to the 19th and even early 20th century, scientists didn't treat the unicorn as a being of legend, but of something that might live somewhere, just somewhere else. It was always somewhere else, but while the unicorn is very fascinating, it was not a violation of the laws of physics and nature, as for example a dragon would have been, where things wouldn't really have worked out. So for the longest time, unicorns were not the subject of myth, and that's why there are hardly any unicorn stories that make them real characters of any sort until the 20th century. But now at last I come to the first written sources about unicorns. The first written mention of a unicorn comes from the Greek physician and historian Ctesias of Cneidian, who lived in the 5th and 4th century before Christ. And around 400 BC he wrote a book called Indica with some facts, but also lots of wild yarns and myths about India. The latter being stories about people with heads without heads, with faces on their chests, and people with large feet, which they used as umbrellas, and people with dog heads who could only bark. But all that aside, what he wrote about unicorns read as follows. He describes them as wild donkeys, as large as horses or even larger. Their bodies are white, their heads of a dark red, their eyes of a dark blue. In the middle of their forehead they have a horn of 1 cubit, that's about 45 centimeters. The stem of this horn is white as snow. The upper part is pointy and of shining red color. The middle section is black. Humans who drink from these horns, for drinking vessels are being made of it, are allegedly protected from all poisons if they drink wine, water, or anything else from such a vessel before or after taking any poison. This animal is extraordinarily fast and strong, so no other, not even the horse, can overwhelm it. There is only one way to confront them in a hunt. If many riders surround them while they lead their cubs to the grazing ground, they won't flee because they don't want to abandon their cubs. In a fight they step with their horns, they kick, bite and lash out against horses and riders. In the end they are slain with arrows and spears, for it is impossible to catch them alive. So this is the first written source about unicorns. And there is a similar book about India, written by the Greek diplomat and historian Megasthenes, who lived from around 350 BC to 290 BC, and who actually traveled to India around 303 BC. We are talking the time after Alexander the Great, so people had traveled there from Europe. And he described the unicorn. There's unfortunately no surviving example of Megasthenes' book. However, other authors have quoted him, the most prominent one among whom is Pliny the Elder, most famous victim to the Vesuvian eruption of 79 AD. And he quoted passages, including the ones about the unicorn, which is referred to as a monoceros in that text, and is almost certainly inspired by the Indian rhino. And this is what it said. The monoceros, an animal with the body of a horse, the head of a deer, the feet of an elephant, and the tail of a boar. Its roar is low-pitched. It has a single black horn in the middle of its forehead, which measures about 2 cubits. So by now the horn has been expanded to double the length. It is said that it is impossible to catch this animal alive. So the image we have here is kind of a combination of some of what we have in these oldest written sources about unicorns. But there's another ancient source on unicorns, and you heard about the author of this source before, because he's a very famous calendar reformer. He did also something with salad, and he had some side jobs, something with military or politics. His name was Julius Caesar. And in his book, De Bello Gallico, his book about the Gallic War, 6th book, chapter 26, lines 1 to 3, he actually places unicorns much closer to our place, namely in the German region. However, it comes with some drawbacks if you read what he's saying. I quote, "There is an ox of the shape of a stag, between whose ears a horn rises from the middle of the forehead, higher and straighter than those horns which are known to us. From the top of this, branches like palms stretch out a considerable distance. The shape of the female and of the male is the same. The appearance and the size of the horns is the same." So much about Julius Caesar's comments on unicorns in Germany. The thing is, chances are that he either just heard some cock and bull story, or by the description we may also assume that perhaps somebody had seen a moose who had lost one antler, and that was a resulting unicorn in Germany. But we have one last source from antiquity which adds a very important point to the appearance of unicorns to this day. And the source was written by Claudius Aelianus, sometimes called Aelian, who lived from about 170 to 222 yes, 222 AD. And his text is the first one to make reference to the horn of the unicorn being in a spiral shape. So we can guess that perhaps he saw the tusk of a narwhal or something. In any case, what he wrote is this: the horn is not smooth, but has spirals grown naturally into it. It is black in the middle section. It is said that the Indians are drinking from this multicolored horn. It is said that a human who has drunk from it is protected from any incurable diseases, will never have cramps, and is immune to poison. It loves solitary grazing grounds where it is wandering around on its own. But during mating season, when it partners with a female, it will get sociable, and both animals are grazing alongside each other. So, let's summarize what we have from antiquity. Ctesias, Megasthenes, Caesar, and Aelian all report on something that they heard about, but none of them claims to have actually seen the animal described with their own eyes. The Indian rhino is a plausible basis for the first two sources, while Caesar's unicorn could be a moose with a lost antler or simply a cock and bull story. It's possible that the horn described by Aelian may have been a narwhal tusk, about which I'm going to talk more when we come to the Middle Ages. But such tusks have occasionally been washed ashore, so they could have given basis to the myth. But there are some core points to remember about these sources from antiquity. Number one, I already pointed that one out, they are never described as fable animals or animals from legend, but they are also always described as real beings just living somewhere else. Point two, they are not, unicorns are not linked exclusively to horses in these texts in particular, but also to deer, to donkeys and goats, and parts of these associations survive into modern times when horses became the more dominant part of unicorn depictions, but for example, to this day they are often depicted with donkey tails and a tassel rather than a horse tail, and cloven hoofs of goats are still often found in unicorn depictions too, even though they don't have those in My Little Pony. So these for older interpretations coexist with more horse-like interpretations of nowadays. And the third point I want to make is that the detoxing effect of unicorn horn is actually the only bit of something remotely magical that is ascribed to the unicorns in those days, while anything with unicorns shooting laser beams from their horns, that's modern. That's not from any of the older sources up to the 20th century. But there is actually a possible source for tales of the toxic qualities of unicorn horn. And this is a sad thing because it threatens these animals to these days, but rhino horns, if grinded down to powder, the keratin of the horn can have a very mild, and I emphasize mild, we really have better things today, a very mild filtering effect that is similar to that of activated carbon that is used in modern medicine. It's a shame that to this day rhinos are often hunted for their horns because some other things are ascribed to these horns as well. In case of a rhino horn, you couldn't make a drinking vessel from it, while you could with a tusk of a narwhal, or and it has been done, or of a walrus, but those cups wouldn't have any actual detoxing effect. Anyway, we are moving on towards the end of antiquity and to the early modern age. Oh, by the way, these images from the 16th century by Albrecht Dürer or late 15th century, they are also based on the old sources with some of the qualities described to the about the unicorn. But he also depicted the rhino, which he knew about alongside it. So Albrecht Dürer may have had some thoughts on the origin of the unicorn there. But in the Middle Ages, the unicorns became extremely popular among a group that we may not really suspect of being in a sense, at least when it comes to enthusiasm for them, as the predecessors of bronies. For the most die-hard unicorn fans were all early Christians. For since the unicorn, due to translation errors, was sanctioned by the Bible, they became immensely popular among the early Christians, and they really drove it to a level that I think even many of us would raise an eyebrow about, especially from the 4th century onward, I mean. Let me quote Saint Basil of Caesarea, who lived between 330 to 379 AD, and he wrote about Christ, that Christ was called the son of the unicorn, since the unicorn, as we can read in Job, is of irresistible power and not subdued by humans. And at a later passage he writes, Christ is the power of God, therefore he is called the unicorn, for the reason that he has a horn that is a joint power with his father. Okay, so he basically says God is a unicorn. And it goes on like this. We have, for example, Isidore of Seville, who lived between 560 to 636, and also several other Christian authors who wrote so-called physiologies, or sometimes they are also referred to as bestiaries, in which real and not real animals are presented alongside each other, usually in an allegorical form and often based on Christian interpretations. And in the Rochester Bestiary, kept in the University of Cambridge, the entry about unicorns reads, and bear with me, this is a long one. I may not read the entire passage because it becomes so religious that it's really, really difficult to understand if you are not very, very deep into this. But I'll read part of it. The unicorn, which is also called rhinoceros by the Greeks, has this nature. A small animal and similar to a kid as in a young goat. Very fierce, having one horn in the middle of the forehead, and no hunter is able to capture it. But by this series of events, it is captured. A virgin girl is led to where it lives and is left there alone in the woods. And as soon as it sees her, it leaps into her lap and embraces her, and thus it is seized. And thus our Lord Jesus Christ is spiritually the unicorn about which it is said, and as the beloved son of unicorns, and in another psalm, my horn shall be exalted like that of the unicorn, and in Zacharias, and I shall raise up an horn of salvation to us in the house of David, his servant. Further, the creature with one horn signifies that which he himself said, I and the Father are one. And according to the apostle, the head of the Christ, it becomes really, really confusing there. So I'm going to cut short on it, but if you want to hear half a page more of this, then you can ask me at the end of the presentation. In any case, the point is that in the Middle Ages, the unicorn becomes a religious symbol too, and also a symbol for all sorts of things, especially on the one hand, marriage, and on the other hand, virginity, both of which the unicorn was used to symbolize. Here we have the depiction of the unicorn being tamed by the Virgin, which can often be found in Middle Ages, in the depictions from the Middle Ages. Or here, this is a little box with a scene from the legend of Tristan and Isolde, who are meeting on the left side, so breaking marriage, and the king who is cheated there is already watching them from the trees, which is seen as a symbol of the loss of innocence. And on the right side, also as a sign for the loss of innocence, we see a unicorn being lured by the Virgin and stabbed and killed. There are quite a few such depictions in the Middle Ages and the early modern ages. Very often the unicorns there are relatively small, more like a goat rather than a horse. We also see the cloven hoofs here, and the goat beard. I wonder what Twilight would say if Discord gave her that kind of beard. Anyway, that's something for fan art later on. And here we have one scene from a whole series of tapestries made in Flanders in the 15th century. You can look them up online, for it's quite a long scenery where we can see the unicorn detoxing water by putting the horn in the water, but already a crowd of hunters is approaching, and there's a whole series of the hunt for the unicorn and how the unicorn in the end is killed. But apparently people in the Middle Ages thought that was a bit grim, so there's also an alternative ending to that series of tapestries. For there's another tapestry alternative ending where the unicorn is not slain, but well, within a fence, so caught but alive. And here we have another example with the unicorn purifying the water by touching it with the horn. We also have the Virgin there. Oh, and we have a beaver in the background with a fish for a tail, a common depiction in the Middle Ages because it allowed people, monks especially, to eat beavers in the time of feasting because it was considered fish rather than meat. But that's just a random snippet of history there. But let's become a bit more economical when it comes about unicorns. For a while they didn't have the amount of merch that we do nowadays. Their merch was really pricey when it came to selling the horns of unicorns, and especially because of the substance of the horn, which was referred to as Einkorn in German, or the Latin translation would be alicorn. Something that we have come to know in a different context, but actually the original meaning of alicorn is the substance of the horn of a unicorn. And we already heard that it was supposed to detox any poison, to make it possible to drink poison without dying from it. And that was very interesting, especially for the ruling class. If they had a unicorn cup, a cup made of unicorn horn, they didn't have to fear poison. And there was a lot of poisoning in the Middle Ages. I'll keep myself from giving all the examples. But in any case, it may in fact have a positive effect on the life expectancy of a lord if he, or a lady, if she, had a cup of unicorn horn. Not so much because there was any detoxing quality to the tusk of a walrus or a narwhal, but if a lord or lady had such a cup, she or he would make sure that the world knew. And if the world knew, well, what's the point of trying to poison that king or queen or lord or lady if she or he has that cup? But actually there has been one case in which a king made put it to the test. Oh, one moment, I'll go back to the test later on, but first of all, here, what we see here is of course not a cup, but this unicorn horn is part of the crown jewels of the Holy Roman Empire. It's in Vienna, this tusk of a narwhal, obviously. Here we have example, you all know narwhals, I presume. Occasionally they sport two large tusks, but usually it's just one, but it has this spiral shape that has been associated with unicorns, but alternatively the tusks of walruses were sold as unicorn horns too. So here we have the horn as we see on the head of Sombra or of Mistmane and the like. And here we have an example for a cup or a drinking vessel made of unicorn horn. And there is one recorded example where a king actually put it to the test. We are talking of King James I of England, who also happened to be King James IV of Scotland, a country which happens to have a unicorn in its coat of arms. But the king put it to the test. Of course, he didn't do so himself. But he had acquired some unicorn horn powder, alicorn so to speak, and he had a servant test it. And when the servant died, the king complained that he had been deceived. Unfortunately, I didn't find any reference whatsoever what the family of said servant thought of this, yeah, the privilege of the king, I suppose. In any case, the thing is that the belief in the detoxing effects of unicorn horn continued, and there are references made to it until the time right before the French Revolution. And to this day we can still sometimes find traces of this when looking at the names of pharmacies. At least I can speak only for Germany, but a very, very significant number of apothecaries, drugstores in Germany, are called Einhorn Apotheke, unicorn apothecary. and this goes back to the belief in the medical use of unicorn horn. Oh, and also, oh sorry, wrong button. And also, this fine seat is located in a country where there's going to be an awesome convention next year, the NorthCon. For this, what you see here is one of the thrones of Denmark, called the unicorn throne. And you can see several narwhal tusks have been used to make this throne. However, as time went on, as ever more of the world was explored, some people became suspicious about the fact that all those unicorn horns sold everywhere seemed to come from over the seas and always by people linked to the sea. And why was it always that way? And suspicions crept up that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't actually unicorn horns. But the traders in those times were quite imaginative and created their own fan fiction. So from the 17th century onwards, you see ever more frequent depictions of unicorns with a maritime basis. Call up on the sea ponies, if you will, when you are economically questioned for selling unicorn horns, always coming via the harbor with people knowing that you haven't actually sailed to India or the like. So there may be an economical point about the development of some sea-based unicorns. Here we have a cover of a later scientific work where you can also see the unicorn with a depiction of a kind of mane almost resembling a lion's and some qualities that don't look very horse-like, but the cloven hooves. This kind of treatment of unicorns continued always as a being that really existed, but always somewhere else. It only changed as the white spots on the land maps grew ever smaller. Until the late 19th century, there was a lot of belief that unicorns actually existed, but in Tibet, and nobody got to Tibet at the time, and only when at least no Europeans, and by the time those white spots disappeared, so did the belief in the existence of unicorns as a species just living somewhere else. So for the time being, that's a part about unicorns. I'll come back to them later, but there are other fable equines that I want to talk about, and I still have some time to do so. So let's get airborne and let's talk about Pegasus. And Pegasus is different from unicorns, well, obviously, no horns but wings, but also in its perception. First of all, Pegasus is not actually the name of a species to begin with, for it's a name of one single being from Greek mythology that was always perceived as legend, as myth, as something from the hero's tale. For Pegasus, the winged horn was an individual from originating in the saga of Pegasus, not the saga of Pegasus, but of Perseus. Perseus, you know, that's the guy who decapitated the Gorgo Medusa, the lady with the snakes on her head who would turn you into discord discord in his stony state if you looked at her. And according to that legend, when Perseus beheaded the Medusa without looking at her, just at her reflected image in a mirror, from the severed head of the Gorgo sprung the winged horse Pegasus, and also a warrior named Chrysaor, neither of whom actually played any role in the further story of Perseus, which didn't keep people in the time of the Renaissance from always depicting Perseus along with Pegasus, and sometimes riding Pegasus, which in the legend he actually didn't do. He had the winged sandals of Hermes, the messenger of the gods, but many people linked Perseus to Pegasus, while in fact in Greek mythology another hero was the one to actually ride Pegasus. So here we have Perseus and the dead Medusa and Pegasus, and like I said, Pegasus used to be a single being only, but soon becoming so popular that the name Pegasus was used more like a species than just the name of that one individual, which created some confusion when it came to actually calling more than one Pegasus. In My Little Pony we have the Latin plural of the name Pegasi. In Greek it would be Pegasoi, and there are some plurals in German which sound so weird that it's funny to say them, assuming that there are some Germans in the audience. I'll just name the suggestions they have there: Pegasusse or Pegasen, both of which sounds odd. I'll go with Pegasi there. As for the actual legend of Pegasus in Greek mythology, there's a legend of Pegasus and Bellerophontes, a Greek hero who has to flee his hometown for accidentally slaying a friend and then doing services for another king. But that king, who has accepted him as a guest, gets a secret, basically has the intention of killing him because his wife, the king's wife, claimed that Bellerophon approached her inappropriately. Actually, she approached him and he didn't want to, and she wanted revenge. In any case, the king wanted to secretly get Bellerophontes killed, and therefore he gave him a task to hunt another being that we know from My Little Pony, the Chimera, which was supposed to be basically impossible to kill, but the gods were on the side of Bellerophontes, and so Athena, the goddess, came to help and actually told him how to harness Pegasus and how it would be possible for Bellerophontes to then ride the flying horse and kill the Chimera and live to tell the story. Bellerophontes did so and became a very popular motif in many Greek and Roman mosaics and paintings. And here's the Chimera as we know her from the series with the goat part, the snake part, and the tiger part combined. And in actual Greek mythology, it's a lion rather than a tiger, but a tiger looks really cool too. And in the end, Bellerophontes became a bit too full of himself and thought he was as good as a god. That's a bad idea to think that in Greek mythology that never ends well for anyone in Greek mythology who thinks so. And he tried to fly up to Mount Olympus to take his place among the gods. And then Zeus he sent a mosquito to stab poor Pegasus the whole time until Pegasus bucked off Bellerophontes, who fell in most legends not to his death but to remaining life of misery, while Pegasus was never seen again, at least not as an individual, while as a depiction on coins and pottery and wall paintings, etc. Pegasus became very popular and also became more of a species of winged horses than the one individual only he had originally been. And there are also early combinations of unicorn and with wings, even though, interestingly enough, there hasn't really been an actual name for them. They were often referred to as winged unicorns, or there has been the suggestion to name them pegacorn. Alicorn, actually, like I said, was the substance of a unicorn horn, and it has been popularized by My Little Pony to use that word for a winged unicorn. But there's one other reason why I will pick this picture of, let's call it an alicorn, namely the origin of this sculpture. For this presentation cannot cover everything there is to cover, so this is my bow of respect to the Chinese culture and their parts in unicorn legends. For what we see here, this sculpture is from the time of the Northern Wei dynasty in China, that is about the 5th century AD. And what we see here, I think we can all agree, we are seeing a winged unicorn here. While it is not quite certain how it would have been called in China. Many of you may probably think of another species now that we have seen in My Little Pony, the kirin. The kirin would be the Japanese version of a kiling being the Chinese version of a being that is actually not exactly linked to horses, but is somewhat chimeric, being with scales and antler-shaped horns and a lion mane, etc. There's one Chinese word apparently describing something much closer to a European unicorn. The word would be shi. But now I'm going to cut short on that part. Just be aware that there's a lot more unicorn mythology to discover in the Far East, more than I can cover here. And let's talk about the Hippolectrion. For I already mentioned that even if possibly unintentionally, there is a part in Greek mythology that could be linked to the meme of Scootaloo as a chicken. I have very serious doubts that that was in any way intentional by the makers of the series, but in fact Greek mythology, or at least Greek popular culture from the early Bronze Age, included a being called the Hippolectrion, that is a horse with the wings, the tail and the rear end of a rooster. A Hippolectrion is actually a very, very popular motif in ancient Greek paintings, very often on pottery, and also on coins, and, oh, not a coin here, but you get the idea, and sculptures. And it had its peaks in the 6th century BC, where it seems to have been a meme-like, a modern-day meme. You could see Hippolectrions everywhere, but there's also some indication that the Greek didn't take this very serious, for we don't have any written stories about a Hippolectrion, so we don't have a saga like Pegasus or something, and we have one written source which is a bit of an example for the fact that they probably didn't take it very serious. For there is an ancient Greek comedy, a play called The Frogs, and in that play there is a poet named Aeschylus, and he is being ridiculed for the use of the word Hippolectrion, and people admonish him not to use words which would confuse even the gods. So while they depicted the Hippolectrion everywhere, they didn't know what a Hippolectrion was when somebody said the name. Okay, so much about this. And then there is the hippogriff. The hippogriff is actually a rather modern invention. We don't have the hippogriff in any ancient mythology, but we actually know the inventor of the hippogriff. The hippogriff being a combination of an eagle's head with a horse's body. So basically we have a griffin and replace the lion parts with the horse parts. And well, traditionally they are not linked to the hippocampus, the sea horses, as we can see in My Little Pony, but I will talk about those in a moment. But in any case, the inventor of the hippogriff is an Italian called Ludovico Ariosto. He wrote a play which is called Orlando Furioso, or well, the German title would be Der rasende Roland. It is an epic story in which the titular hero, Orlando, uses a hippogriff to fly to save the Princess Angelica from a sea monster. And in the same play there's also an English prince named Astolfo, who actually uses a hippogriff to fly up to the moon and back. Somebody should have told Luna about that. That could have been interesting. But in general, hippogriffs have been, well, they didn't get a lot of attention, and it was actually Harry Potter and the hippogriff Buckbeak there who made hippogriff more of a household word in recent decades, even before My Little Pony came along. So, let's get to the water. For we have had the unicorns, and we had some land-based creatures and air-based creatures, but horses entered the water too. And the best example being the hippocampus, or the seahorse, as one could say. Horse horse head and horse torso with a fish tail, and often with webbing on the feet instead of hooves, so which would be helpful when swimming. And it can be found in many ancient depictions, very often linked to Poseidon, the god of the sea, for he was also the god of horses, and so often he was depicted with horses, but with horses that also gave some credit to his main domain, namely the ocean. This one, this mosaic here, is from a Roman terme in Bath in England, but seahorses didn't stay limited to Greek or Roman mythology. Here's a more modern depiction from the 17th century of a hippocampus, you know, the time when unicorns too became more maritime. But here we have steel from the Picts, you know, we are talking Scotland now, and there they too had the image of the hippocampus. However, you may also be aware of some other Scottish horses linked to the water, namely the Kelpie, a being so horrible that it has not found its way into My Little Pony, a horse that would wait at waters, especially at water crossings, and if this shape-shifting horse, actually maybe there is some inkling of it in My Little Pony, though the Kelpie is not usually linked to shape-shifting the way the changelings do, but in any case, these horses near the water would offer a traveler to carry him or her across. You should not accept that offer. For once you have climbed on the back of the Kelpie will carry you down to the deepest water where you will drown. There are some variations in the legend, for in some legends it is said that the Kelpie can be tamed if one manages to bridle it, and sometimes you can tame it by removing a bridle already on the Kelpie. But while we haven't seen any Kelpies in My Little Pony, there may have been some voices familiar to you in case you watched the DuckTales series from 2017, where these little Kelpies named Briar and Bramble sound rather familiar. Well, Briar was voiced by Tara Strong and Bramble by Andrea Ligman. And they actually managed to make these horrible creatures extremely cute. And now let's get human, well, horsey human. Let's have another being that we also have in My Little Pony, Lord Tirek, the centaurs. And yeah, that's something, well, let's say that the centaur in Greek mythology is usually very often rather not safe for work due to their origin. The thing is that the centaur differs from other mythological horses in Greek mythology because the centaurs are capable of talking, thinking like humans, acting like humans, and acting like very, very horny humans. The reason being that the origin of the centaur is as follows, that there was a party, a wedding, and during this wedding celebration, Ixion, the king of the Lapith, wanted to sexually harass Hera. Hera, the wife of Zeus, and she took a cloud and shaped it in her own form, some Pegasus quality there, so that Ixion raped the cloud instead of her, and the result was a centaur. And so accordingly, the centaurs in Greek mythology are often depicted as very unrestrained, conniving and horny. For example, here we have Nessos, the centaur who is about to be killed by Heracles after he tried to abduct Deianira, the wife of Hercules. But even while he is dying, he is already planning for a post-mortem revenge on Hercules by telling Deianira that she should pick up his own blood and put it on the clothing of Heracles in case she ever thinks he doesn't love her anymore. And when she does that and Hercules puts on the coat, he finds a very horrible end then to be one of the very few mortals actually being allowed on the Olympus, but that's a different presentation. There are some exceptions to the rule of the unrestrained and evil centaur in Greek mythology. The most famous one is Chiron, whom you can see here, a centaur who is depicted as very wise, very noble, and also acting as a teacher among other to Achilles. And he is also the only mythological creature who is not an immortal god to be mentioned in the Iliad. You know, the legend about the Trojan War, which doesn't sport many mythological creatures other than the gods, but he is the one exception there. But we have had so many Greek legends and Roman legends so far, but they were not the only ones interested in horses. There are female centaurs too. But maybe this horse here looks familiar, and it should, due to a convention coming up next year, the North Horse Convention. And when you see this horse here, does anything strike your attention? Many legs. This horse is certainly not legless. It can take some cider, I suppose, because we are talking of Sleipnir. Sleipnir, the horse of the god Odin. I think everyone is here is older than 18, so I can risk. Yeah, okay. Then let me tell you the origin story of Sleipnir. The thing is, in Norse mythology, there's always the threat of Ragnarök, the end of the world, and the final battle between the gods, the Asen, and the giants. And in the mythology, there's a frost giant, Jotun, who offers the gods to build a wall around Asgard, which even the giants could not get past. But in return, this frost giant wants, as a reward, he wants to marry Freya, the lady after whom our Friday is named. And Freya is not exactly on board with that suggestion. So the gods agree on the condition that the walls have to be completed within 6 months, which is an impossible thing to do. However, the giant agrees on the condition that his own stallion, Svadilfari, may help him in the construction. The gods agree to that, and actually he does a really, really good job and is about to complete the walls. And Freya is getting nervous, and the gods are getting nervous about having to hold up their end of the bargain. And you know whom to ask for whenever you don't want to be loyal to your promises. In ancient Norse mythology, of course, you ask Loki. And what Loki does is he, changes his shape into that of a very beautiful mare in heat, and then he walks near Svadilfari, who is distracted to the point that Sleipnir is the result of said distraction, and the wall is not completed, and so Freya doesn't have to marry the frost giant. Leave the rest to yourself. However, there are one more thing about Sleipnir. Other direction. Sleipnir, by the way, means the. Sorry, it takes a moment to get back. I'll be back in a moment. But the name Sleipnir means slippy or the slipper, because Sleipnir can not just travel on land, but also slip through the air and through water. So you will be a mount for Odin, no matter where Odin wants to go. Okay, okay, here is, and I'm basically done with him now. So, back to the next table equine. Now we are coming to Islamic tradition. For Islamic tradition too has a very noble equine, who will be here in a moment. It often takes some time for the presentation slides to get accustomed to getting scrolled forward and then backwards and back again. In any case, in Islamic, that's a different direction. You know, always for the slapstick, And here we go. Okay, whom you see here, this is Burak, or Al-Burak. This is a horse-like being with a human head and wings, which in the Islamic tradition brings the Prophet Muhammad to the heavens and back within one night, and in another night from Mecca to Jerusalem. And since Muhammad tied the Burak to an iron ring at the foundations of the second temple on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, the wall there is to this day known as Burak Wall, and it faces the Al-Burak Mosque in Jerusalem. One interesting thing is the name, Al-Burak. I do not speak Arabian myself, nor do I speak Persian, but it is interesting to see how much the name differs depending on which translation variant you pick. From what I read, it is very, very difficult to actually precisely translate the name if interpreted in Arabic. But there are some suggestions, and the funny part about it is that they really sound like a selection of all the possible names we can find in My Little Pony. I have a list here of all the possible translations for Burak in the Arabian interpretation. I quote, beam, flash, gleam, glimmer, glisten, glitter, radiate, shimmer, shine, sparkle, twinkle. Some of those words are familiar to us, and the funny part is that if you take the Middle Persian interpretation of the name, it translates to riding beast or mount, which is a bit more prosaic, so to speak, but it makes a good example for what a difference the language can make. Here is a Philippine depiction of Al-Burak, also showing that this famous fable horse can also be found all around the world. And now let's get to modern times. Not talking Charlie Chaplin here, but one thing I have made clear before is that there were no sagas, no legends, no real stories about unicorns as characters. They were always the being living somewhere else. We knew that they could clear up poison, and that they had a thing for virgins, which made it possible to capture them, but they didn't appear as any characters in an actual story about unicorns, where in stories they appeared at best as background ponies in a story not really about ponies. But this changed in the 20th century, and this book has been very important for this. The novel The Last Unicorn by Peter Sawyer Bache of 1968, and also, perhaps even better known, the movie adaptation by Jules Bass and Arthur Rankin Jr. Of 1982. I have tried to find older stories in which unicorns actually appeared as characters, as individuals, rather than representatives of a species. And if any one of you knows any such story, I would be most curious to hear it. But for all I can tell, this is the oldest case that I'm really aware of a unicorn in which the unicorn is an individual character, and with an actual name, Lady Amalthea, as she is called, once transferred into a human. And the novel also created a bit of an archetype of the unicorn, in the unicorn being very noble and majestic and superior, and being very aware of that too, of all that, and therefore being somewhat unapproachable and arrogant, something that doesn't hold true for all the unicorns in My Little Pony, but in the game description for the pen and paper role-playing game, they said about unicorns that they were mighty, elegant, magical, and they know it. So that kind of still holds true. And and by now there is, of course, a wave of popularity for the unicorn that sometimes causes the presentation to jam a little. Perhaps there is some resistance for the next picture. Oh, come on, it's not that bad. Give it a moment, it will be back. I know, no, don't. Remain seated, it will pass, I know that. You know, I do that as a job, and I've been there before, and here we go. Yeah, okay, now you know why the presentation may have done. You know, there are some extreme forms of, well, kit that may be beyond what even most of us would enjoy, but well, everyone is free to enjoy what they will, but I just wanted to show one extreme depiction of the cliche that people associate with us as a whole. They always remember, when you talk to people who don't know what the Brony fandom is and what it is about, this is what some of them may have in mind. Be patient with them. Most people are very open if you talk to them and explain the Brony fandom to them, but always keep in mind that they are not evil when this is what they are known, what they have in mind, if they don't know what the Brony fandom is. But beyond those kinds of depiction, there have been very many and sometimes even rather conflicting or opposite associations with the unicorns. They are seen as rare, beautiful, confident, special, strong, innocent, and they allow for people to project whatever they want on them, which may be part of the popularity of the unicorn. They are, of course, also symbol for the LGBTQ community, a role in which the unicorn has taken a very positive effect, I think. Then there are, of course, self-ironic depictions of fat unicorns or unicorns doing rather mundane things, so to speak. They too have gained popularity. And I'm now coming to the final point of my presentation. The thing is, even though we may not like it, we know that unicorns do not walk this earth as a horse or a donkey or a goat would. But that may not be a bad thing. For all the sentiment, the emotion, the creativity, the fun, the joy that we have with unicorns and other fable equines is much more real than it could be if they were just walking around the corner. The preciousness of that which is only in our mind, in our imagination, in our fantasy is worth so much more. And as I said, there were no real stories about unicorns up to the 20th century. So today, we are the makers of the myth. We are the writers of the stories. We are the bards and poets who will come up with the stories which later... Yeah, okay, there are different qualities of fan fiction out there, but in any case, we have a myth to make for the future, for those who come after us and read it and enjoy it and will come up with their own stories. So in a sense, we, the Brony fandom, continue the noble tradition of the singers of legend and mythology of old, and I'm getting rather theatrical here, don't I? I hope that you all enjoyed this little excursion into the realm of unicorn and other fable equine mythology. And if you have any questions about this, please fire away, and here are some of the sources used. Yes?
So, I mean, I think virgin maidens being like connected to unicorns is quite typical. Is there a reason that they're...
One moment, can you pass this one?
Virgin maidens being connected to unicorns is quite typical. I think this is something that people generally know from like the Middle Ages. What about like virgin lands in the Middle Ages? Is there any notion to this, or is this because of this purity and innocence that is attributed to the maidens?
Well, I never heard of a story with a virgin lad there. Usually, in the Middle Ages, the female is linked to innocence, while the males are not. Usually, there can be the noble knight, but that is usually the exception, while the virgin is always pure and still treated rather badly by the guys. So, yeah. toxic masculinity. I suppose the unicorns probably had a sense for that, I'm afraid. At least I never heard a story of a guy who could approach a unicorn. They always talk about the virgin in the Middle Ages, always refer to a female. Yes?
Also, just because you did talk about Kirins, and when I was watching the show, or also now that I play TOE with some friends, and I do play as a unicorn, and we've gone to visit the Kirins, and I made the choice of my unicorn persona have like kind of like that donkey type tail and a more curved horn. I realized that the depiction of the Kirins in My Little Pony also resembles this like elder sort of unicorn stereotype, like with the chest fluff, which kind of looks like a beard, I suppose, the horns being more curved and nature connected, and also having these like cloven hoofs. Do you think that also that like the depiction of the Kirin itself, like in our world, but also in My Little Pony, is kind of like a nod to these like archaic unicorns maybe, or like that there's something there?
As for those depictions of Kirins which I have seen, very often they are spotted at Chinese restaurants, don't look very horse-like, more resembling lions, more than that. But you know, this is also exactly what I meant, part of the fun. In your role-playing games, in your stories, you can create the Kirin you want to create, and there's nothing wrong about it, no matter what people may have written or not written in the Middle Ages. You are one of the writers of the future legends. Go for it. Oh, can you pass on the mic to the robot?
So, often, at least in what is it, the more modern depictions, the horns of unicorns can be depicted as rainbow-colored, etc. Do you think that this derives from the description of them as multicolored, based on black and white horns found in narwhals, or when does this appear? Does this appear in the Middle Ages? Is this more of a modern invention? I was curious if you knew anything about that.
I'm just trying to get back to the images we have from the Middle Ages. The earliest depiction I am aware of with rainbow-colored unicorn is 20th or possibly 21st century. I think it would be 20th century already. But there is the description in the oldest sources of the horn of the unicorn being not just one color, which actually became more common later on, but three colors, and usually they are given as red, white, and blue. Red, white, and black, as shown here in the images. Wait a moment. I think it would be easiest to restart the presentation and then skip forward. We have seen on the one hand the depiction based entirely on the early descriptions. That was a modern interpretation of those texts. But we have the presentation here of the image by Albrecht Dürer from the late 15th century, which had the multicolored horn, though not in rainbow colors, but here we go. This reddish, whitish, and blackish part as described in the early sources. But yeah, it's for rainbow, 20th century and onwards. And I think it's only in the late 20th century that rainbows were connected to unicorns. I mean, rainbows had been a very popular symbol in the past already, symbolizing many things. I'm at least not aware of a direct linking between unicorns and rainbows in the Middle Ages, but I cannot totally exclude that there may have been some connection brought up there. Rainbow being a symbol in religion too, you know, Noah's Ark and all that. The rainbow is often shown there as a sign for the new alliance between humans and God after the flood. And so, with early Christians being great unicorn fans, it's quite possible that they have appeared there. Yeah. Are there any other questions? Then thank you very much for your attention, and if you have questions later on, be my guest. I'm always happy to talk.
Good.